Hello, everybody, and welcome to November. We're here already. Uh, Not only is it November, but it is also Native American Heritage Month. We are so excited that you're here today, and we are looking forward to our discussion focused on the evolving Native American workforce and Indigenous economy. We are so lucky in Minnesota to have, as you saw from our trivia earlier, 11 federally recognized American Indian tribes with reservations throughout our state. And we are honored to have such a great group of guest speakers and are thankful that they've taken time today to share their information, resources, and best practices with all of us. My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm the Director of Workforce Strategy for the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And we are so happy to have you here with us today. If you are new, thank you so much for joining us. And if you are returning, thank you for joining us again. Our team of consultants work regionally, which means that each of our consultants will have a slightly different way that they do their work based on the region that they're serving and the employers that they are working with. But the common core ways that we support our employers are identified here. We work with you to identify gaps in your current strategies, ensure that you're connected with all of your local, regional, and state workforce partners, and we assist you in building out strategies that will help you attract and retain workforce. And I want to take a brief moment to introduce our brand new workforce strategy consultant, Becky Zubek. And she comes with us to us with a ton of experience in workforce development, recruiting, and human resources. And we're so lucky to have her join our team and supporting the southern part of the state. So give us a wave, Becky. Yay, there's Becky.
Thank you.
Yay.
We are really lucky to have you and are thankful that you're with us. Our consultation process is rooted and informed by data and is developed specifically with your company's needs and goals in mind. And we serve as your guide through the entire process. And we convene workforce partners for support, and we share training grant opportunities, and we continually check in to ensure progress is being made and assist in making adjustments along the way. When you work with us, you are automatically connected to a wide network of people and partners who work collaboratively for the success of our state and our regions and our communities so that your business and our workforce can thrive. We do not do this work alone, and it takes many, many people to bring success to these efforts. Our session will go today until 12, after which we will segue into our 30-minute unplugged portion of the event where we invite you to turn on your cameras, unmute yourself, and ask questions of our panelists as well as our team of workforce strategy consultants verbally or through chat, whichever you're comfortable with. I'd also like to take a moment to encourage you to fill out the evaluation at the end of our time here together. We will get that link popped into the chat, but we really do care about what you think and what you are most interested in learning more about. You can see here on the slide right now, we got one more month, folks. We got one more month to this year, which is bananas. But we are excited that next month we will be showcasing our lineup for 2025. So we'll get that schedule out and you'll get to see it next month. As always, all of these webinars are recorded and available to view at any time on YouTube, as well as our careerforcemn.com website, where you will also find recordings and resources from this session, as well as all of our previous sessions. We will be utilizing our chat feature today throughout our time. Please ask questions, answer questions, and interact with all of our guests, consultants, partners, and each other. We really do want to continue to build upon the community that we've started, and we welcome your engagement. To kick things off, if you haven't already, please let us know who you are, where you work, and what you would like to learn more about today. We have a very packed agenda with guests who have dedicated their careers to being change makers and culture shakers, and I'm so excited for you to meet them. So without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce you to our Northwest-based workforce strategy consultant, Mr. James Whirlwind Soldier.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm just as honored as you are to be part of this conversation, part of this exploration of a part of our economy that oftentimes gets overlooked, right? The contributions, the supports that are available, so on and so forth. And so this is a great opportunity to celebrate part of Minnesota's history and Minnesota's culture that is is rich and constantly contributing to the economy of all of us. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go into look at our agenda for today. Um, Pretty typical. We're going to change things up a little bit. We're going to dive into the data right away. This is based on work done by our labor market team. We're going to look at what some optimistic viewpoints of what the Native economy looks like, what the Native demographic looks like, and what we as employers and supports can look forward to. After that, we're going to transition to having an interview with Mr. Jim Crowd of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. We're very lucky to have him with 22 years of experience working in workforce, working with job seekers, and working with a team to again provide those great equitable, sustainable, and meaningful career opportunities to the people that they work with. After that, we'll go ahead and pivot to our panel discussion, at which point we'll be welcoming Mr. Martin Jennings, the Executive Director of the Northwest Indian Community Development Center, Mr. Jacob MacArthur, the Associate Director of the Veedon Center for Rural Development, amongst other things, in for a chat to look at what the economy looks like for Native people, how the Native economy has changed, and how it is going to be moving into the future. We'll share some resources with you as we go. We'll throw those into chat. We'll also put those into an email for you and send those out at the end of this session. And then, of course, at that point, we will go ahead and transition into our Unplugged session where Miss Shayla Drake, happy birthday, Shayla, will be facilitating a conversation between all three of our special guests today. So I really look forward to the conversation, and let's go ahead and get started. Yes, as we mentioned, Mini, at the beginning of this conversation means water. Our state name comes from a Dakota word meaning we're land where the waters reflect the sky. We're lucky to have 11 Native nations within the border of Minnesota. These are our neighbors and relatives. We're very, very, very happy to have them. And we're also very happy to have our urban Native communities and people in this border also. As many of you know, Minneapolis, the metro, is the third largest urban Native community in the United States. Another reason why we should be very, very proud and very invested in our neighbors. Before we start talking about the data, I wanted to go over a couple different things for us to just think about and ponder as we move forward, especially as workforce developers and users of data. Historically, researchers have conducted studies within Native communities. They've collected sensitive personal information, cultural information. They've done this without consent. They've done this without benefit to the community, and oftentimes they would even use this data for acts or bills or so forth that actually didn't, the opposite of serving the Native community. The data from these studies has sometimes even been used to further negative stereotypes or to push those policies, like I just mentioned, that Native communities do not support. So I think it was the United Nations, amongst other organizations, that developed something called the CARE Principles, which says that Indigenous peoples have the right to data that are relevant to their worldviews, and empower self-determination and effective self-governance. Indigenous data must be made available and accessible to Indigenous nations and communities in order to support Indigenous governance. And it's interesting, I was thinking about this morning, and I have an undergrad degree in anthropology. And when we were taking our ethics class, one big part of that was discussing how back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, a lot of times anthropologists would use alcohol to get this data. So not only was the data maybe itself used negatively or unethically, but the actual methods to access that data was also done unethically. And so we're moving forward thinking responsibly, being considerate, and making sure that that our Native neighbors and relatives and partners are part of the process when it comes to data. We also want to make sure that we note that there are plenty of voices out there that communicate loudly that the data, our official data sets, are off for Native people. In fact, a study by Brookings showed that our official data sets used to represent our Native populations could be up to 75% off. Now, this is different than the Census Bureau estimates that estimate the Native count is only about 4.9% off. So now, how did Brookings come to this conclusion? Well, oftentimes Native Americans identify as two or more races at a significantly higher rate than other groups, and you can see this on here. 87, 88, 83, 80s for most other races, but for Native people, it's down in the 30s. Also, how natives identify themselves or how they are told to identify themselves can also impact these numbers. Ideas like blood quantum, um, enrollment, like the Kill the Indian, Save the Man policies cause the identity to not be too straightforward. The native demographic is the only one where you have to qualify to be considered one. And we know what happens with the impacts of bad data, right? When the population numbers get so small that they can be excluded from important studies and surveys as a specific group, this can effectively erase them. And this is actually a common occurrence when data is aggregated in a way that excludes many Native Americans and treats them as a small enough population or a portion of the population to be ignored entirely. Undercounting Native Americans in census data leads to significant negative impacts, including lack of adequate funding for vital services like healthcare, education, infrastructure, and so on and so forth, especially on reservations. Reduced political representation and a diminished ability for tribal governments to plan for community development due to inaccurate population data. Essentially, it deprives Native American communities of resources needed to address their unique needs and challenges. And so with that, we can move into the data, but we always want to make sure that we kind of communicate some of these concerns on the front end. Currently, Minnesota is home to 68,641 residents who reported American Indian and Alaska Native alone as their race in the 2020 census. Now, this is about 1.2% of our population in the state. However, with 88,247 residents identifying as Native American in a combination with one or more other races, this combined population is closer to 157,000 people. And of course, this is not including that the disparity that we talked about previously. Now, while the state's population grew 7.6% over the past decade, the state's American Indian alone population increased by 12.7%. However, the population of American Indians in a combination with another race grew far faster at nearly 116%. Taken together, the population of American Indians alone, or in combination with another race, accounted for 13.7% of the state's total population growth during that time. Now, a much higher percentage of Minnesota's American Indian population is under 35 years of age. That's compared to the other, let me start that over again here. A much higher percentage of American Indian population is under 35 years of age. Which shows a far larger, the white population, shows a much larger age profile. Over 25% of the state's American Indian population is under 15 years of age, compared to less than 19% of the total population. While just 8.4% of American Indian Minnesotans are 65 years and over, compared to 16.8% of the overall population. Now, taken together, this means a much larger share of American Indian population will be in their prime working years. That's ages 25 to 54 over the next decade. A wonderful opportunity for job employers. Let's talk about the labor force a little bit. Minnesota's American Indian labor force participation rate is lower than every other group of Minnesota nationwide. If you look at this stat right here, you can see that our labor force participation rate is the lowest in our state. In the United States, the Native American participation rate is also lower. However, and this is something that we need to think about. Our labor force participation rate is actually lower than that of the United States. And Minnesota is supposed to be above average. Does this mean that we're doing a poor job at reaching our Native relatives and neighbors with the supports that we have for a workforce? It's something we need to explore. Now, for American Indian Minnesotans participating in the labor force, the unemployment rate is more than 3 times the rate for Minnesota's total labor force, and significantly higher than any other Minnesota group. Again, it is also higher compared to any other U.S. group. Now, these unemployment rates differences are actually statistically significant. Regarding the high unemployment rate and low workforce participation rate, Deed's LMI team have pointed to a sense of discouragement in our workforce system. And I put discouragement in quotes because there's probably a stronger word we could use there. Now, why is that? What is this discouragement that causes individuals to leave the workforce at a higher rate than other demographics? One of the problems is the difficulty escaping from the lowest rung of employment. thus not being able to escape from those low pay rates. So, for example, in my region, Native American people make about $3.91 less per hour than non-Native people. And again, a lot of that has to do with the inability to kind of escape those lower rungs of employment. There are fewer opportunities, for a demographic that is, deeply connected to community and family. There are not as many opportunities on reservations or in Indian country for people. Um, Oftentimes, Native people work in more customer-facing service industries, which is one of the reasons why COVID had such a strong impact on Native communities, and why we might also see some of this disparity with regard to hourly wage. Let's look at employment trends. Minnesota's American Indian employment had been trending up for a decade until the COVID-19 pandemic. From 2010 to 2019, jobs held by American Indians increased by 31.5%. In comparison, employment for all races in total increased by 11.2%. You can also see the Native employment to population ratio increasing. The disparity in this number between natives and non-natives was 17% in 2010, but that decreased to 11.6% by 2019. You can see where the pandemic hit there. That employment trend took a dip, went back down to about 12.1%. But that being said, American Indian employment still increased by 6.3% from 2021 to 2022, compared to 2.7% for all races. Without the pandemic, we would have seen this trend continue upward. Larger percentages of workforce over time. This demonstrates the resilience of Native workers, and we'll see that in a second. We're seeing them move into new industries. If you're looking for a group that is where employment is increasing across all industries, Native American people might be where it's at. And we can see this right here in this report. We'll send this out to you all, but you can look at some of those service industries, food industries. The percentages are actually going down, and we're seeing Native people enter into different areas of employment that maybe they were traditionally underrepresented or even absent from. Let's jump to business ownership really quick here. The Census Bureau's annual business survey shows that 513 firms, Native Americans account for nearly 0.5% of business ownership amongst classifiable employer firms in Minnesota in 2021. People who identify as white accounted for about 87%, and nearly 4% are owned by Asian residents, and about 1.9% are owned by Black residents. So again, we're seeing disparities across many different demographics with regard to business ownership. Minnesota's American Indian business ownership grew by 32% from 2017 to 2021, increasing from 389 firms to 513. This is rapid growth, especially considering that Minnesota's total employer firms declined by 2.6% during this time. However, our neighboring states to the east and west had even faster growth of American Indian business ownership. So the competitiveness in us should really push for a change there. Again, with all this positivity, right, with booming youth, booming workforce, all this stuff, we're still seeing the same results coming from the workforce. Minnesota's median income for American Indian households was about 18% lower than for American Indian households nationwide, which was estimated at about $50,183. This is even more notable considering that Minnesota's median income for households of all races was 12.5% higher than for all U.S. households. This American survey, our census survey, 5-year estimates for 2021 show that 34.5% of American Indian households earn less than $25,000 a year, compared to 13.4% of all Minnesota households. The percent of Minnesota American Indian households with income from $25,000 to $50,000 is also higher for Minnesota households of all races. A 68.7% majority of Minnesota households have income over $50,000, compared to 42.3% of Minnesota American Indian households. Now, this is important because it speaks to the challenges that come with poverty, and what it means to get an equitable wage, to be an employer of choice for Native people, to understand what those unique challenges and obstacles might be to that sustainable, meaningful, and equitable career. But again, it also shows what the impact can be with that career. And then last but not least, before we move on to interviewing Mr. Jim Crowd, who wanted to talk briefly about these poverty rates again. The state's poverty rate was 9.2%, which is 3.4% below the national rate. However, in 2021, it was estimated that more than 30% of the state's American Indian population had incomes below the poverty level, compared to just 7% of the white identifying population in Minnesota. So we're seeing great things happening, but we're seeing the same results coming from those great things. But again, I just wanted to point this out to show that a meaningful, equitable, and sustainable wage can change the trajectory for an entire family and for those people in the periphery. Moving on, I wanted to introduce everybody to Mr. Jim Crowd, workforce specialist. He's a veteran in this area. Jim is a member of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe. He spent early years in White Earth and later moved to Minneapolis. And then he moved to Duluth in 1984, where he earned his liberal arts degree at UMD. Over 22 years as a spent over 22 years as a workforce specialist for the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, starting as a retention specialist, moved to a job counselor, equity mentor, employment specialist, and now Jim serves as a program coordinator with a team of people for the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. Jim, thank you so much for coming today.
Morning, James. Happy to be here. Good morning to everybody.
So you work for the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization?
So the Minnesota Chippewa tribe originally was the governing agency for the 6 Minnesota bands in Minnesota. And as I mentioned the other day when we talked, most of the bands have moved on to create a lot of their own infrastructure, a lot because of the casino profits. So there are still programs within Minnesota Chippewa tribe. We have finance, education, natural resources, human services, and we are trying to get back our elder program. But we don't play as large a role as we once did as a governing agency for all the bands.
It still seems like you have a wide scope of things you do as an organization.
Yeah, we have our program. We have a small staff. There are only 5 of us in the Tribal Employment Services program. We cover 17 counties. Yeah, so that would be Duluth is one of our offices, Virginia, Cass Lake, and any place in Minnesota where there's a reservation. Any of the towns that border the reservation are the places that we provide employment services to any of the band members that are there. So it's an incredibly large service area. We've had to find innovative ways to try and reach people in some of those more remote locations, like all the way up in up by Ely.
Yeah.
And some traveling, and of course technology now. Almost everything seems to be Zoom, like the meeting we're doing today. I think a lot of places are not traveling as much as they used to, and we try to do the same thing now. Take advantage of technology.
Yeah, especially with transportation issues and so forth.
Yeah, after COVID, everything changed a lot.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that for a second. So, you've been in this space, working in this area for a long time. How has the workforce system for Native people changed, in your opinion, over your time in your positions?
Well, I think I can't really speak to the other programs. Like here in Duluth, there are 7 employment service programs. Our program deals specifically with only the band members for the 6 reservations. So I haven't been to a lot of the other programs to see. I mean, we provide the same kind of services, but we're an all Native staff, so we have a different approach to how we work with our clients. We are also still, I mean, we still have to follow DHS requirements, but I think we have a different approach, and we're able to meet people on a different level. We're familiar with the life experiences that people have had, obstacles and barriers that they might face, and we try to help each person individually and whatever their goals might be. And I think sometimes some of the other programs are very rigid And it's also punitive because their benefits can be reduced if they're not meeting requirements. And we try to be a little different in how we approach that and how we view each family, each person, and take that into consideration. And we're really here to try and help everybody, each family meet their goals.
Yeah, you do good work. So you work within this workforce system, kind of apart from it, though, it sounds like.
Yeah, I
Uh,
would say that we are considered different and different from any other program in the city of Duluth. And again, I don't know the specifics. I go to the online meetings, and I just know that again, I think the main thing is that we are not as rigid, and we have a smaller caseload than some of the larger programs where there's maybe hundreds and hundreds of people that they do as a team. Like here in Duluth, there's only three of us. In Cass Lake right now, we only have one counselor, and in Virginia, we only have one counselor. So we're spread thin right now. It's been very hard to hire, and
yeah.
it's been a struggle.
But what? So you are working at least parallel with the bigger workforce system. Uh, what is one way that the bigger workforce system, could change to improve outcomes for Native people?
Okay, well, one thing is something as simple as just putting out some signs in Ojibwe language, that says "Anin, bonjour, bien again," hello, welcome, come in. As I mentioned the other days when we were speaking, when I first saw some of these signs, like in Bemidji, it made me feel more welcome about going into a store. I see a business that had that sign, and I did feel welcome that I could go in, and I thought. I recognize this language. This is part of my language, and if they could put up any kind of whether it's something as simple as posters or any kind of symbolism that welcomes us as Native people.
Sorry about that. You've also talked to us during our last conversation about the Disparity Project, which it sounds like that's not going on anymore.
Yeah,
Can you talk to us a little bit about that, what it was?
sure, sure. So this was several years ago now. This was a grant-funded program, City of Duluth, the state. Um, I was selected to be a part of this as um, a job counselor at the time with the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe, and then we had one other organization, which was Community Action Duluth. And so the intent was to look at the disparity of, like what you were just talking about, all these employment statistics that historically we are at the lowest level of all these numbers, and trying to find ways to address some of those disparities. And it was a 3-year project. There were some outcomes. Something like this still would need to be ongoing. One of the things that we did do is partnering with larger employers in the area. That for us, that would be the hospitals, and we could set up wage subsidies to give some of our people a chance to get into these workspaces that they might not otherwise know how to navigate or get through that process. So we could place someone there, and we could pay their wages for 4 to 6 weeks and give them an opportunity to prove themselves. And then after that, the person would be hired by the employer. And we try to get the type of jobs where a person would get a livable wage if possible, as much as possible, and then benefits.
Yeah. So is that something that's not going on anymore, correct?
No, that was a 3-year grant. Some of these grants come and go. They've tried many different approaches over the years. I remember early on, there's been different models of one of the first was kind of the bootstrap story, or you work your way up the old bootstrap story. That was when I first started, and the bootstrap approach really didn't work for most of our people. And the DHS has changed a lot over time, and I think it's been good. We welcome the changes, and we've changed a lot as well, as we've learned, and we've learned to navigate these programs, and we've branched out. I have many programs and partnerships that I could turn to if we were to access that kind of funding again.
But Jim, we're actually out of time here. So I know that you're going to be joining us during the Unplugged session, and I'm excited about that. I actually have I think a couple of questions set up for you there too. But is it okay if people in our audience want to reach out and talk to you and maybe talk about the job seekers that you are working with?
Sure, that's great, Vinny. I'll be here.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, Jim, thank you so much. We'll talk to you in about 30 minutes.
Sounds good.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to our panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen. First off, make introductions. First off is Mr. Martin Jennings. Martin is the Executive Director of the Northwest Indian Community Development Center in Bemidji, Minnesota. He's a member of the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. Jennings has dedicated nearly 4 decades to advancing economic and community development in tribal and rural communities across the Midwest. His career includes significant experience with tribal government, small businesses, and philanthropy, where he has worked at the board and program director level to create more inclusive and economic opportunities. Under Jennings' leadership, the NWICDC has expanded from a vocational and technical training center to a holistic community development hub. It now offers resources such as housing support, employment counseling, youth and family services, and cultural programs grounded in Ojibwe values. Jennings emphasizes local and cultural grounded strategies that restore and sustain community wellness, advocating for Native community-led development and a reimagined framework for economic self-sufficiency. Jennings' work reflects his commitment to challenging conventional economic models and supporting self-sustaining, culturally rooted development pathways for Native communities. Through the NWICDC, he envisions pathways to both preserve Ojibwe culture and provide meaningful opportunities for Native individuals and families in Minnesota. Martin, we're very, very happy to have you today. And next is Mr. Jacob MacArthur. Jacob is an enrolled member of the White Earth Nation in Minnesota. He serves as the director of the University Economic Development Administration, EDA Center, and the associate director of the Veedon Center for Rural Development at the University of Minnesota Crookston. In these roles, MacArthur is dedicated to promoting economic growth and development within the rural and tribal communities across Northwest Minnesota. His work includes supporting small business development, enhancing local infrastructure, and fostering workforce readiness through culturally relevant, community-centered initiatives. MacArthur's leadership reflects his commitment to improving economic opportunities within Indigenous communities. As vice chair of the White Earth Tribal Utility Commission, he is also actively involved in advancing sustainable infrastructure and resource management for the White Earth Nation. Jacob, we're very, very happy to have you.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen. All right. I know we had some delays with regard to Mr. Jennings coming. Shayla, do we know if Martin was able to join us?
I have not seen him, and I'm just going to see if he's in the chat anywhere to raise his hand, because maybe he's coming up under another name or something, but.
Oh, there he is.
Keep your hand raised, Martin.
Raise
your hand again.
Here. Okay, now you should be able to allow your mic and camera.
There you go. Okay, good. You're good. You can raise. Perfect.
Sorry about that, Martin.
No problem. Sorry for being late.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, you're good.
This is great. I'm so excited to have this conversation. Let's dive right into it. Martin, just to kind of give us a little bit of a foundation for this conversation, do you mind giving us a brief history of the Native American economy in Minnesota?
Sure. It's hard to kind of do that without giving like a historical timeline. So, you could go and Google this, look up BIA policy, but there's basically 6 different eras, and I got to touch on them just real briefly because it'll help you understand. So the early treaty making policy happened between 1790 to 1830. Then there was a removal and relocation reservation period from 1830 to about 1890. There was a assimilation and allotment era where they were trying to assimilate natives into mainstream society by dividing up lands. That's probably where the greatest loss of land occurred. And then they moved to a reorganization era in 1935, which was kind of a shift in policy away from assimilation and genocide. And then there was a renewed termination policy in the 50s to the 70s. And then right now we're still under a self-determination era that started around the late 1970s. When I kind of graduated from college, I went to BSU, got a business degree back in the early 80s. We were kind of on the tail end of not really the tail end, kind of like maybe a decade into the Self-Determination Act. And, what I saw was, tribal communities, looking at the termination policy, the relocation policy. We really didn't get into economic development efforts until the 70s, maybe the 80s, unless tribes in the country had kind of coveted natural resource bases. And then you saw more of that early extraction policy around minerals prior to that time. So in Minnesota, some of the early economic efforts really didn't occur until around the 70s and 80s. And a lot of those approaches were really based on what the federal government had assessed as needs. And then there was also, I think it's important to, in prior to the Self-Determination Act, there was a policy to relocate families into urban centers just because of the poor economic conditions, high poverty on reservation communities, lack of economic opportunities, and that was 1956. And so my family, going back to my grandmother, they were part of the relocation era. And so again, this is a continuation of like mainstreaming and pretty much just obliterating native lifeways, tradition, and culture. So then you kind of like fast forward, you look at what the impact of these policies has been. And, I often used to share early on that the intention of the federal government wasn't really to build private sector economies. Everything was set up to extract and control resources that tribes had. And so today, as you look around the country, there really isn't a lot of tribes that have successfully developed private sector economies that you would find just say like in a rural area. So Bemidji is like an economic hub, so they've got a strong private sector. So each reservation really has a limited private sector, which is predominantly controlled by federal resources to provide social services to tribal members. I think some of the contentions about sovereignty, the ability to secure physical assets on tribal, there's a whole bunch of complications that tribes really had to work through to become more active players in the economy and have their own economy. And so when we look at the business climate today, most of the tribes really are still supporting like regional economies. Now with the advent of gaming in the 90s, now that's kind of shifted. So I think when I started working for the tribes in the 80s, poverty rates were probably around 40%. Unemployment was as high as 60%. And, there really wasn't much economic activity. Now with gaming, those resources not only through the gaming enterprise, but all the ancillary functions have changed. There's more resources coming to tribes, and most of the tribes are major economic engines in regional economies, but there still isn't what I would say a developed native sector economy. Most of the money that the tribal communities bring in goes back out into the regional economy, and the regional economy is the one that gets the multiplier effect as money changes hands through different types of transactions. So native economies, there really wasn't, you didn't see tribes getting into that till the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and sometimes even the 90s with gaming, because they had to go through a legal process to put things in place to allow that type of commerce. And so you've got a lot of businesses that are just first generation businessmen or businesses. You don't have that intergenerational transfer of wealth. And so you've got the change today that tribal communities and tribal consumers really drive a lot of the economies, but they're still not, they don't participate it like in the slides that James was showing. The participation levels isn't consistent with what their contribution is. So we've still got these lingering effects of assimilation, termination, and when I think about the challenges that I face, it wasn't until COVID forced employers to really take a different look at hiring the native workforce, that we didn't have native employment that much in the greater Bemidji area. So I think the Native American economy, we're strong contributors. I remember all the kind of dated on some of the millions of dollars. So, like in Bemidji, as an example, like healthcare, we're located between the three largest tribes, White Earth, Red Lake, Leech Lake, and they're probably putting in, I'd say, in excess of like $40 million into the healthcare sector, just as an example. So that's typically what tribes are doing, but the access and the inclusion and the welcoming part that Jim was talking about, it's still kind of lingering with what the original colonial intent was. So
Yeah,
I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I
that's great. I could draw out a timeline or something like that to really show what this looks like. And it kind of reminds me of what you and I were talking about, Jacob. You once mentioned that when we were talking about those local native economies, you mentioned that the economy can feel off reservation and maybe like distinct. Can you talk about what you meant by that and what the implications of a non-local economy is to Native people?
Yeah, sure. Well, here on White Earth, I look at purchasing like groceries and essential items. I have a couple of different options. One, I can stay here local to the one grocery store and pay, kind of pay through the nose for nutritional food or essential items, or I can drive 45 minutes in any one direction to get those items at a decent price, right? A Walmart or a supermarket. Or I have a third option that's becoming increasingly popular, is these Dollar Generals, which pop up on the reservation. I can go there and the price is right, but the nutritional value and quality of the items I'm buying is very wrong, and my money isn't staying local. It's going to these big corporations. So
Yeah.
Our reservations, by design, we're in rural, remote areas, so we really have to go off reservation and spend money in these big corporations, and our money goes elsewhere. It doesn't circulate locally, doesn't help out other small businesses, doesn't support the jobs at home. So yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about when I say an off reservation economy. It's just you got to go off reservation to get what you need.
It's distinct. It's separate. What do you think I guess the question is like, how do we, is a local economy something that Native people want to build? Martin, do you feel that, like you talked about that that native sector economy. Do you think things like generational wealth and some of these concepts we use in the more mainstream society apply to native culture?
Well, it does, but it's just it's an element of kind of like an indigenous perspective of living and well-being. And so there's a financial aspect to it, but really the life that was kind of put out ahead of us is really speaks about living in balance with your mind, body, and spirit and soul. And so it isn't really like an economic principle, but there is a financial aspect of it because we can't live off the land anymore. The resource base isn't there, the economics aren't there, and just the nature of how things are set up, we can't live. So we've got to kind of modernize that. Now, the opportunity that I think is there is particularly I think the majority of all of our reservations are all in rural areas. Maybe you could say Shakopee might be a little bit, but those were no different than a rural regional economy. And so when I first started doing economic development in the 80s, you always had people thinking about, well, that's the reservation, this is the rest of the region. And everything was always done separate. And so when I was doing economic development with the tribes, all of the normal partners, whether it would be the developers, the utilities, none of those guys were like my partners. So we always had to do everything in isolation. And as the rural economies are struggling, we've really got to look at the rural resources collectively, and that includes both the native and the non-native. But we've got to think of those assets in a way that are renewable, regenerative, and they're consistent with things that we should be involved in. So I think there is an economic connection there because we have to survive, and the reality is we're in a market economy, but we need to be doing things that are environmentally solid, things that will provide 7 generations ahead of us. So we've got to make different types of decisions on what type of economic activities we want to pursue.
Yeah. Jacob, so again, talking about these economic opportunities and kind of walking this line, I know we talked before about your work with the EDA to develop a credit building course. But I think you also said that was one step to developing a local circular economy on Indian country. Did I have that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Could you talk about that a little bit and talk about other ways to support that local native economy?
Yeah, well, starting with the credit building course, my predecessor here at University of Minnesota Crookston, Mitch Berg, he started this partnership with the Affinity Plus Credit Union to bring a credit building course to Red Lake Nation. And I've since took over that, or bringing that back to Red Lake, but also bringing it home here to White Earth. And specifically at White Earth, we're developing a partnership with our tribal college to integrate the credit building course with our first year experience course, so that we can get our young learners, those fresh out of high school, develop the financial literacy skills and the knowledge of credit building to get them off on a good path as they go through school and start their career, but also help our older students learn the ropes and understand the importance of good credit.
Because you don't always see like banks and so forth on reservations. You talked about the food deserts where you have to kind of go off to find some of those things you need. I think, I know that there are at least a few reservations out there that lack a bank. And so we're talking maybe even first generation people starting to work within these systems. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah,
Definitely. Martin, feel free to chime in too. Sorry.
Yeah, I definitely think again, the financial literacy, the knowledge of the credit building system, it definitely needs to be part of the that general education that we give our people from our tribal colleges, so they can understand what it takes to build credit and access capital, to get their business ideas off the ground, so they can be a part of that economy, and develop those solutions, and developing our communities and revitalizing them.
Yeah.
So I think that's the importance of credit building.
Absolutely. I ended that with one last question I want to throw up to both of you, if that's okay. What are other ways to support that Native economy that would be in alignment with the culture and the priorities of Native people? Do you want to start, Jacob?
Can you repeat the question, James? Sorry.
Yeah, just what are other ways to support the Native economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're part of an organization that has access to resources, visit and listen and learn to your local Indigenous community. Understand what their priorities are, what their what their needs and wants are, and if you have resources that you can share, such as technical assistance, business planning, connecting Native entrepreneurs to capital, things like that. Just support your local Indigenous community.
Thank you. I'm throwing you a wild card here, Martin. What do you think?
I think part of the thing that I struggle with a little bit, kind of growing up in the business economic field, so I gotta, I'm kind of educated in the Western development approach, the capitalistic extractive approach, and that's not a sustainable model. And it's really based on, short-term gain at the expense of everyone else. And, in all my years of doing development with tribal communities, that approach really hasn't changed. Like if you go to college, you're still going to get the same kind of education I got. You're going to be taught the same kind of principles. And we need to move away from that. And so, when you're supporting a Native economy, when you're trying to support a Native people in general, there's a lot of industry players that really are harmful to tribes. So one, you wouldn't support them. So that'd be one thing. The things that are non-renewable, extractive, exploitive, you generally wouldn't support those type of businesses. So, and every reservation community has them. There are businesses that are purely exploitive. I give you all sorts of examples on that. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is all of those resources that are normally are not resources, all of the economic opportunities that have normally been available to the general population really haven't been available to Native people. And so you have to kind of think about, if you see a business that doesn't have Native employees, it's kind of like, well, why don't they have Native employees? There's a lot of Natives here. And so we have to look at the policies and practices and make those kind of provisions for them. And so anyone that's in the economic development field working with business owners, we have to start asking them about, how are they being inclusive? How are they being welcome? How are they being sensitive to communities that maybe have different worldviews? And so that moves us away from that old extractive transactional model of exploitation and win-lose. We've got to promote something that's more win-win. Then we've really got to open up opportunities to Native people and other communities of color. Minnesota's got one of the stronger economies in the country, but we've also got some of the worst economic disparities in the country. So and that's basically because we've allowed that, and then we've normalized that. And so we've got to start challenging those notions, and really, instead of just doing what we've been doing, we have to take the time to understand, well, how do we do this different that creates different outcomes that gets at these disparities? And that's about sharing decisions and wealth and power, and those are hard.
Yeah.
Those are hard things to let go of.
This is, one of the joys of talking with you, Martin, is you really understand how systems impact communities and the whole. I remember one conversation you and I had. We're almost out of time here, so this might be the question we end on. And Jacob, I want you to chime in if you'd like to. But one thing that you mentioned, Martin, is that we need to change our system from prioritizing the employer as a primary economic driver and prioritize the job seeker as the supporter of economy. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think it kind of ties into, some of the comments Jacob was making. And it's kind of, so if you look at like poverty, what's the best approach to reducing poverty? Give somebody a good, sustainable living wage job. That does more than build the individual, build self-esteem, builds financial security, peace of mind, and then that money goes back into the economy. And so I think, we need to be, again, understanding, what's underneath those things that are holding things in place, and kind of working more towards, again, a different type of reality. And so, again, I mentioned that, and this is a conversation we had, the workforce system has traditionally taken the approach that if you have healthy businesses and businesses are making money, that's going to drive the economy. But, it really depends on a healthy workforce. And, this post-COVID stuff, we don't have the same kind of workforce anymore, and people have different expectations. They want better lives. They want better work-life balance. And when we see the value in economic activities just going to the top, and look at the wealth in the countries vested in the hands of a few, we've kind of got to flip that on its notion. And if we want to get at equity, reducing poverty, creating opportunities, we have to flip that focus on that old model and understand, well, how does this model work to benefit the people? And so if we were to look at the workforce system and say, your goal is to create livable wage jobs for every citizen in the state of Minnesota, and that's what you're going to be measured on, we would do away with economic disparities. Now, currently, there's no such policy. And so the policy is all about, let's help the employers. And the employers are still underneath this model of capitalism and extraction. So that system, the workforce system, really needs to be, it's got to either be a two-party focus system, the employer and the job seeker, or to really get after the disparities, it really should be based on the needs of the job seeker. But that would change all the relationships, the historical funding streams, the investments that you've got right now, it would change those things. And these different institutions have just become bureaucracies that are fueling the outcomes that we see,
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but
I think it does. It's a big picture. It's a lot, but I think it's at the root. Jacob, do you have any opinions on that, or give you the final word?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Martin. We need to focus on the worker. And, through my work at the Vidin Center, we work with our rural communities, our tribal partners. We listen and try to understand, what they need. What are their needs? What do they want to do? And that's how we tailor our, workforce development opportunities, trainings that we offer, is to focus on the individuals and the communities, and not the employer. It's Martin's absolutely right.
Well, I just want to invite our audience to please reach out to Martin or Jacob if you want to continue the conversation or engage in some collaborative efforts with them. We're so happy you both were able to join us today. But we're actually out of time for our primary event. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to my colleague, Della Ludwig from the Central Region. Della, would you like to close us up? Oh, you're on mute.
Of course I am. Great job. Great conversation, everyone. Awesome job, Martin and Jacob. It was great hearing from you and great leadership, James. Really appreciate it. I'm Della. I am Central Minnesota's workforce strategy consultant, and I am here to announce next month. So next month we are going to be focusing on the best of the best in review. So join us on December 4th as we travel back through 2024, and we're going to highlight our presentations from the year. We're going to discuss each of our regions' accomplishments throughout the year, and then we're going to share our contacts and resources that are critical to help our employers grow and succeed. So please join, prepare to share your experiences and ideas as well as we wrap up 2024. We're also going to be announcing our 2025 Workforce Wednesday schedule, and can't wait to do that on December 4th. Our registration is currently open, so feel free to register for that event already. Anybody who registers for our events automatically will get all of the resources and the recording of the event. So definitely make sure that you do register for these events. You can also go to careerforcemn.com to check out our past and upcoming session topics, resources, blogs, and ways to engage with your regional workforce strategy consultant. And you can receive our emails and reminders about these events and our newsletters and any other information about what our team is up to. Join us again on Wednesday, December 4th. Registration is open. And what we're going to do next is, again, thanks James and the panelists for what a great time talking about the evolving Native American workforce and the Indigenous economy. It was super informational and I learned a ton of information. What we're going to do is take a quick second. We're going to turn off the mics, make sure everybody has the opportunity, or I'm sorry, turn off the recording so we can turn on your mics and your cameras. And we're going to turn it over to the birthday girl, Shayla, and make sure that she is ready to roll.